Hello everyone, welcome. Welcome again to the monthly live stream where I try to answer your questions that you submitted to the Google form that is posted on the description to this video. Also, Mary will give you the link in the chat so you can add any of your questions that you want. I'll try to go a bit more quickly through these. We missed a few along the way, so that was a bit difficult. The first of our questions, and before we start again, remember that we're doing this with a kind of noble intention. We're doing this thinking about the benefit of others, right? Benefit of sentient beings. And so we could direct our minds to those who are suffering greatly in the world, especially the poor people in Gaza who are just caught between the wheels of warring nations being used as pawns and suffering so greatly. So I don't think we got this question completely answered last time. It's from an anonymous interlocutor, and it's from the USA. It says, is karma just a system? If so, how can that be when we have to pay for the crimes of another person? So there's a lot of points here. To my understanding, the action one takes in the previous lives affects the condition of your birth and your life. How does this explain the abuse, suffering, and death of children? So this is a very loaded and deep question, and it comes up really very often in Dharma teachings. Because we feel like, for example, well, how can that be? Because, you know, how come if I've never done anything wrong in this lifetime, then I can be a victim of somebody else's actions? So the important thing is that if you're going to have a belief in karma, then you have to have a belief in rebirth. These two cannot be taken separately. And most Westerners kind of think like, you know, they think like if I have a bad thought, then I'll bang my head 5 minutes later. And that's like karma ripening. Well, most karma you experience is experienced in future lifetimes. And so people often think there's this sort of blaming of the victim. When you talk about karma, it's like you're blaming the victim. And that doesn't really work in terms of the Buddhist presentation. We're not trying to blame the victim. And there's another important point here, and that is, if you have an acceptance of karma, then you will also accept things that happen. And part of our problem, part of the reason why we suffer so greatly in our own lives, is because we can't accept things. Now, in general, all spiritual traditions are systems of generating acceptance. And this acceptance that is generated varies in terms of degree. And the usual technique, you could say, or method that's used, the usual kind of presentation, is that God is responsible for everything, right? And so, for example, I saw this guy talking about the Hindu position, this Hindu yogic position on religion. And there, especially in the lower forms of the tantras or the lower forms of Hindu practice, then they see God to be this all-powerful agent, and that everything is the will of God. And the way the guy explained it, he said, well, if I go out into the street and this man, he shouts at me and he says harmful things, if I believe, it is the will of God, then I won't get angry with him and I won't fight back and it won't make things worse. So this is a very kind of simple way for us to understand a kind of really mundane presentation of a spiritual position that can be beneficial in terms for society, right? If everybody had this belief in acceptance that, for example, it's the will of God, then we wouldn't react so greatly. We wouldn't perpetuate suffering, you know? Like these days, it seems like a lot of people think that the solution is to get more angry, you know, if something doesn't go your way. You know, there's this notion, for example, it's happening in the Middle East at the moment. It's like if you drop more bombs, it's going to sort something out. And if you look historically, that's never worked. You know, how many bombs were dropped on Iraq? How many bombs were dropped on Afghanistan? I mean, the Russians were in there for a decade or something like that. Just dropped millions of tons of ordnance. Didn't sort anything out. And after that, then the Americans were there and they were dropping bombs. Vietnam, that was going on for years and years and years. They got nowhere. They carpet bombed the place. It just doesn't work right. Our general solutions don't work. So at some point we have to learn some level of acceptance. And theistic religions is quite simple, because we can say that that God willed this, and therefore I have to accept it. And then we don't make the things worse. That's a really kind of tactical way of thinking about karma. Now, karma is slightly different, because it doesn't say Benjamin Billow worked here in Germany. No, actually it didn't, Benjamin. If you look historically, then the bombing of Berlin, etc., was going on for years and years and years and years and years. And the amount of ordnance that was dropped in World War II is just unimaginable. But people kept fighting, you know. It was like, look at what Hitler did to Britain. There was this bombing campaign, the Blitz, what we call it in Britain. And people generally think, well, if we drop lots of bombs, then people will give up. But it only makes them more hardened and resilient. In fact, after the bombing of Berlin, etc., then it took decades for many German people to accept that they'd done anything wrong. Most of them had still believed the narrative that they were kind of victims. And I mean, there's people I met in Canada who after the war moved to Canada. And because we had this kind of thing of reconciliation, and we invited everyone to come and live in our country, and there would be no blame. And they were still, 40 years later, they were still going on about how they were doing the right thing, and that they were the victims. So you can't change people's minds through bombing them. And it doesn't solve things in the end. It's definitely not working in the Middle East. It's only making things worse. And it didn't work in London. And the Russians are doing the same thing in Ukraine at the moment. They're just dropping lots of bombs and thinking that on the cities and on civilians, and they're thinking that people will give up. But it only makes people more hardened and resilient. You know, why do we have, for example, ISIS? Why did that ever happen? Probably because the Americans went into Iraq and dropped loads of bombs everywhere. Right? It just perpetuates suffering. So anyway, that's a different topic. So this question is really loaded. Is it just a system? No, karma isn't a system. Karma is causality. Everything is karma, right? You know, there's various causes and conditions. I've got this penny here. If I let go, it's going to drop. That's the best way to think about karma. You say, is there karma? Okay. Is there anything you can think of that doesn't have a cause? Doesn't have influencing factors that brings it about? Think as hard as you like. Spend the rest of your life. You'll never find anything. You'll never find a causeless agent, and you'll never find a causeless phenomena. This is important. So it's not just a system. And then, like I said, karma is to be experienced in future lives primarily. Now, if you say God created everything, it's his responsibility or her responsibility, then you will develop some amount of acceptance. The difference with karma and Buddhism is what you're saying is that you laid down the causes for your current suffering. And that's not to blame the victim. And also, you can't do anything about what you did in the past. But it will do two things. It doesn't only just make you accept things, and so they won't traumatize you so much, but also it will make you act in a positive way. The important point is, if you believe in karma, is that I have to apply myself to virtue and avoid negativity. And if everybody did that, we wouldn't have any trouble. But if I think, for example, if I think, well, it's God's will if I suffer, but God doesn't like them, so it's okay for me to kill them, right? That doesn't solve our problems. If you truly believe that God was responsible for everything, then you would say, well, God made my enemies as well. God made the Muslims. God made the non-Christians, etc. And you wouldn't fight with them. But we don't do that. We get a really messed up way of interpreting things in general. And we have a messed up way of interpreting karma. For example, karma is blaming the victim. So the questioner, interlocutor asks, if so, how can that be when we have to pay for the crimes of another person? Well, you don't pay for the crimes of another person. We think we do if we believe that karma is only about this lifetime. But the point is not that you were blaming the victim. It's not that you're bad, you're sick because you're a bad person. The point is we have all had countless lifetimes. It's infinite. What the Buddha taught is that there are infinite universes, and we continue to cycle around in samsaric existence. And we will continue to cycle around in samsaric existence as long as we have the negative emotions. We have the negative tendencies, our tendencies towards anger, resentment, right? Greed and desire, jealousy, pride, and so forth. And if we have these, then we will act out. This is called karmic formations. And through acting out, then we will bring about negative results. And if we want to stop the wheel of karma, there's no point in bickering about the past. saying, why is this happening to me? Why isn't it happening to somebody else? If you want to change things, then you have to start with the one in the mirror. Change yourself, make yourself better, and through that influence others. And if everybody does that, we're going to be okay. But as long as we hang on to our resentment and trying to blame somebody else, then it will never happen. So in a tactical or in the terms of methodology, that's one way to think about karma. But for somebody who has a higher level of view, then they will also understand that experience is a projection. That based on our conditioning, we will see the world in a particular way, and then we will experience it, for example, in terms of suffering or happiness. And we can see this is the case because if you go, let's say you went to a political rally in the United States, and they've got basically two kind of factions, right? So if there's like a MAGA person at a Kamala Harris rally, they're going to be going, oh, this is so terrible, look at her lying through her teeth. And then the person who's anti-MAGA will be like, isn't she great? She's so much better. It's the same event. The event is the same, but the perceiver has a different way of thinking about things. Thank you very much, Paul. That's very generous of you. I hope you can afford all these donations you're making. The perceivers have different outlooks, and because of that, they have different experiences. Like somebody might think like their daughter is learning ballet, and then they go to see the performance. And you know what it's like when you've got little kids who are doing ballet. They can't do it, right? they're lousy. But the mother will be thinking, oh, look at my darling dear, isn't she doing wonderful? Isn't it amazing? It's not amazing in terms of like, professional ballet or anything like that. And then there'll be somebody else who will just think, oh, this is so boring. Like the father, let's say the father isn't really into it, but the mother wants the daughter to go to ballet classes. And it's like, it's your turn, dear. You've got to go watch and you've got to pick her up. And then he goes there and he thinks, oh, I wish I was out fishing, or I wish I was in the bar with my friends. This is so boring, right? It's the exact same event, but from different perspectives, people have a completely different experience. It's like everybody has this narrative about China in the West. And the Chinese have all these narratives about the West, and the Russians have their narratives. And we all think we're living in different worlds, and that we're all deceived and deluded. It's not that there is a fixed world. This is the important thing that the Buddha taught. There's no fixed identity, no fixed world. What there is this propensities, this bigotry, this habituation, this tendency to identify and to judge things. So we perceive that we're suffering for somebody else's crimes, but we are all complicit. And you don't have to think about past and future lives. You don't have to think about karma, cause and effect to understand how we are complicit. For example, everybody complains, look at these Bezos, he's like a billionaire, he's so greedy, look at all this. Why is he rich? Right? He's rich because we want stuff. We don't see it. We want to blame everyone else. We want things quick, cheap, right to the door. I want to go online and go, oh, I want a new kite surfing kit or whatever. There's all this stuff that people are into here in Vancouver Island. I'm not even sure what all the names are. There's these kind of surfboards that are motorized by battery and they float on the water. I don't even know what they're called. So there's all this stuff that people have. And we want that. So where do we go? We go to Amazon. That's why they're rich, right? It's because we have desire. Why are we fighting in the world? Oh, it's because of all those terrible people. Well, we have armies. Why do we have armies? We voted for these people. We think we need armies. So we kind of try to think like wash our hands. It's not got anything to do with us. But the essential message is that we are human beings. Essentially, we're not good or bad, but we have these negative tendencies. And these negative tendencies cause us to act out. And then if we act out in a negative way, it's only going to have negative repercussions. And so forget about hanging on to your trauma. Forget about trying to blame somebody else for your problems. Apply yourself to virtue. Be a beacon of virtue for others so that in the future we can make a better world. And don't be selfish, right? Because we think like, well, why should I do that? They're not doing it. And nobody else is thinking about the environment and worrying about climate crisis. Why can't I just drill more oil and be more rich kind of thing, right? So it's going to make me poorer. It's because we're selfish. If we think, well, I might have to suffer in this lifetime, but my children and their children's children is going to be better. That's a selfless action. So this is all wrapped up in what karma is. And this point about why do children have to suffer and die, again, it's not about saying, well, those kids are terrible because they did negative karma. This is what happened actually. My mother's really anti-religion, and part of the reason is because her brother, when he was 12 years old, got hit by a car. And he became a paraplegic for the rest of his life. And the priest said, oh, God was punishing him for his sins. And it made my mother so angry. She was like, how can he have sins? He's only 12 years old. And it doesn't work if you think about just this lifetime, right? So for me, this Christian presentation doesn't work. Because like a newborn baby, right, it doesn't have sins. So you have to say, well, it's not being punished, it's the will of God. Well, why would God will that? But in karma, it does work, because it's not just me. I'm not a bad person. It's like we all have had infinite potential for negative acts, positive acts, neutral acts. And we've also all like been born in heavenly realms. In future, we will experience great wealth. In future, we will be the richest man in the world, right? And next lifetime, we might suffer greatly because we have this huge store of past deeds accumulated through countless eons, through infinite universes. And it's not sure, it's uncertain when that karma will ripen. And what we have to do is forget about the past. There's nothing we can do about that. What we have to do is apply ourselves to virtue in the present moment, and especially generate bodhicitta. That's this wish for all beings to be free of suffering. That's the ultimate cause for liberation. That's the message of karma. So, and I'm not going to explain any more about it because I've talked about this many, many times, and also I want to get through more questions, but I hope that was helpful. Who has the Vajra Crown given to Düsum Khyenpa, and is it still used in ceremony? So Düsum Khyenpa's crown isn't a real crown, right? That's the first Karmapa. The one that was created in the, what was it? 9th century or something? No, it wasn't. It was the 14th century, 13th, 14th century. That's a real crown. That's probably the one that exists now. It's in Rinpoche in Sikkim. It's a province or state of India. The original crown was conceptual. It's like a trans-dimensional entity. It's not a real thing. It's woven through the Dakini's hair, so it could only be seen by enlightened beings. As we know, then Sambhogakaya emanations of the Buddha can only be seen by noble beings, beings that are liberated from samsara. And it's like that for Düsum Khyenpa's crown. It's a sign of enlightenment. It's like some kind of fractal manifestation that, like an aura maybe, that somebody who's got a really high level of realization could see. It was never a real thing. It could never be seen. It's not made of substantial real things like particles and atoms, right? It's a manifestation of enlightenment. But the historical one was created by the Chinese emperor. I think it was the 13th century. I can't remember now. Anyway, I did a video on it. And it was a real crown. It was made out of yak's hair and rubies and gold and stuff like that. And oh, somebody's editing the form as we speak, or they're working on it. Maybe it's Sonia. So that exists. It's probably the same crown. It's been restored many, many times over the centuries. It might not be the same crown because it's quite old, right? It would be hundreds and hundreds of years old. It might have been remade several times. There might be some original parts in it. Often there are many old relics in Buddhism. For example, we still have relics from the actual Buddha's time. So that was 2,600 years ago. So there are many old relics. It could be the same one. And it's in a box in Sikkim still, I think. What do you think of Dzongsar Rinpoche? Dzongsar Rinpoche is the Lama who does all kinds of weird things. And he did lots of films. He did Travelers and Musicians and all these really wonderful Bhutanese films. And one of his students did The Monk and the Gun, which is a recent film. So he's got this tradition of doing kind of modern stuff. He also like dresses up in drag and does all kinds of weird things. And what I will say about him is that my own teacher is people think my own teacher is a real traditionalist and kind of conservative. And so one would assume he wouldn't like this kind of Lama who does all kinds of weird things. Like he wears, like I say, he wears drag and stuff like that. Women's dresses and things. And he hangs out with all kinds of Westerners and talks on controversial subjects. And many people criticize him. But my own teacher says, that guy knows meditation. My own teacher has great respect for him. And I also have respect for him. From what I can see, he also understands meditation. So his kind of unusual activity is associated with this. there's this, you might not have noticed this, there's this strange kind of instruction. Like this Mao Mudra and Dzogchen is a very strange tradition because you have to come to realize non-duality through that. And part of that is realizing the sameness of all phenomena. For example, there is no good or bad. And so sometimes the teachers will get students to do things that are intentionally embarrassing to break down their clinging to good and bad. And one of these things you will see is like they'll make them put on like makeup or something. It looks really weird. And I've seen this a few times, and I've seen it on Dzongsar Khyenpa Rinpoche. Of course, nobody's talking about this. Nobody talks about it, or it's just like, why is he wearing makeup? They don't know. But their teacher will say things like he did hint at this in an interview I saw with him in China. And his teacher said, because he's got a secret Dzogchen master. And I don't know who it is, actually. It's that secret. But his Dzogchen master tells him to do stuff. Like he said, okay, you can go to China and you can do this thing, but you can't let anybody know you're there. And Dzongsar Khyenpa Rinpoche said, he was using this as an example. It's like your teacher will tell you to do something. It's like the whole world knows I'm there. And I'm supposed to pretend I'm not there. And stuff like that. And I've seen him wearing this kind of women's makeup, like lipstick and eyeliner and all this stuff. And it's kind of like a way of breaking down your tendency towards embarrassment. A very real example of this. I'll give you a more simple example of this. There's a Khenpo Tsotrim Gyamtso Rinpoche. He's quite a famous Dzogchen and Mao Mudra teacher. And his students all sing. They sing all these songs, like these songs of realization. They're modern translations of the teachings of Milarepa, etc. And so they generally, when they go places, they sing. And he said to Ari is a really famous translator. He's an American. And he said to Ari, you lead the song, sing this song. And so he was at the front of the line. And it was in Cornwall, actually. It was in this tourist place. It's on top of the cliffs. It's a really beautiful place, and there's lots of tourists. So there's loads of tourists there. He said, Ari, you sing the song. And so Ari goes off and he sings, friends are empty form, just like a water moon. Like this, walking down the path, right? And what had happened was he told them to do that, and then they all stood back. And he didn't know, but he was walking off on his own, singing and dancing in this crowd of people who are just ordinary tourists and know nothing about Buddhism. And they're all looking at him like, this guy's crazy. And he turned around and they were all gone. They weren't there. So he was on his own. But the teacher did that on purpose, put him in an embarrassing situation to help let him let go. Like a good meditative practitioner doesn't care about what other people think about them. They're free of the opinions of others. And it's actually a really profound and important point. So Dzongsar Khyenpa Rinpoche is working on this kind of level, and you can see he's doing that. And that's the reason why he does things like goes out in drag. Because you have to kind of be pretty free of other people's opinions to do something controversial like that. And he would do that in front of monastics, really conservative right-wing traditionalists, not right-wing, but conservative traditionalist monastics. There was this big meeting in Paris or somewhere, and there were hundreds of Buddhist monks, and it was like a Dalai Lama meeting, which is everybody's really low key, right? And he showed up wearing a woman's dress, and they were all like, "Oh my God, what is he doing? This is embarrassing." And he said, "You care more about the clothes on the outside than what's on the inside." So this is an indication of why he does what he does. So I have a lot of respect for that. I can see where he's coming from, and my teacher also can see that it's that. And I was surprised. Because I would have thought my teacher would think, this guy's a fake. He's just doing all kinds of random things just to get attention. But he never says anything critical about Dzongsar Khyenpa Rinpoche. And he can tell. He knows, yeah, this guy knows how to meditate. That's what I think too. I think he knows how to meditate. But it's risky. And I think sometimes these techniques backfire for him as well. Please explain what the pre-lamrim for Westerners is. Well, the preliminaries vary between different traditions. They're not the same. This is somebody from Austria, by the way. The no name given. The question for Dzongsar Khyenpa Rinpoche was from Chimi from Nepal. Oh, that's interesting. The person asking about that was from Nepal. Yeah. Actually, he's quite famous in Nepal. And the people are mixed about their opinions about him. Some think he's terrible. He's like bringing down the Dharma. And others think he's amazing. He's like a siddha. Oh, that's something I need to say about this. There's a term called siddha. And so like Tilopa and Naropa were siddhas, right? They go around like wearing yogic clothing and acting weird. And in general, they will do this. They'll like get drunk or they'll dance around. And it's part of this practice. Generally what's explained is you'll go up onto the mountaintop in your cave and you'll meditate until realization arises. And then when you realization arises, you go down in what it says, go down into the marketplace. Marketplace is where lots of people gather in the ancient world, right? The bazaar, they call it in Nepal. And you go down to the marketplace and you do weird things, like take off your clothes and start singing and dancing. And then what people would do in those days, if somebody acted like a madman, they would throw shit at them and insult them. So you go down and you start dancing around naked, and then people throw shit at you and hurl insults. And then the practitioner, they'll look to their own mind. And if they get embarrassed, or if they get upset, then they realize, my meditation isn't going well, and they'll go back up into the mountain. So it's this practice of going into the marketplace. It's directly associated with what Dzongsar Khenpa Rinpoche is doing. And then, so they have this notion, and it's in Nepal, Tibet, India, that there are these siddhas. So there are people who are doing that. So when you see somebody acting weird, in the West we might think, who's that homeless beggar, who's that drug addict? They will go, oh, I wonder if he's a siddha. And then some people use this acting like a siddha as like charlatans. So they'll go and intentionally act like a madman, and then people go, oh, he's like a Tilopa, he's a realized master, and then they'll give him money. So there's a lot of con men who do this. So you have to kind of figure out who's a real siddha and who's not a siddha. So my teacher, Khenpo Labu, it's not him, it's like a Tibetan phrase, it's act the siddha. So the equivalent in English would be act like a madman. So when you say act a siddha, it means one of these people who's like who's faking it in order to get other people's respect or to get food and money from them. But then there are real siddhas, and we don't know who these are. And so because of his respect for Dzongsar Khenpa Rinpoche, then I think he identifies him as a true kind of practitioner. So please explain what pre-lamrim for Westerners is. This is from Austria. It's anonymous. There's different preliminaries for all different traditions, and there's different preliminaries for all different practices. Lamrim means stages of the path. If you look at the Ornament of Liberation, if you look at Words of My Perfect Teacher, these are all lamrim practices. They're practices that tell you what you need to do at the beginning, middle, and end. That's what it means, the path and the stages of the path. And then there's preliminaries for them. And those preliminaries, they vary for all different traditions. But in general, there are some things that are in common. And the most common thing is what are called the 4 thoughts that transform the mind. So these are the thoughts of sort of first thinking about how wonderful this opportunity is to be a human being who's able to practice the Dharma. And if you practice on that well, what you will do is you won't waste this lifetime. You won't cling to this lifetime, cling to the pleasures of this lifetime, but you will practice the Dharma because you think, wow, I got this opportunity. This might be the only chance I have. And then you meditate on death and impermanence. That's the second common preliminary. And death and impermanence will make you not waste your time. Obviously, you'll be diligent, but it will also stop you from clinging to future lifetimes. So this is related to this question about karma. You'll think, well, even if I'm born as a god next time, like say I'm really generous and I keep good virtue, like act like a Brahmin and I don't eat meat and I do all this, and next lifetime I'll be born as a god. But if you have an appreciation of impermanence, you'll realize, yeah, but once I died from being a god, I'm going to be reborn in the hell again or whatever. And so there's this famous story about the Buddha and his relative. It's related to this. And so then you develop renunciation for samsara, so you no longer cling to future lifetimes. And then you can, and then you practice on, for example, karma, cause, and effect. Is the third one. Karma, cause, and effect means that, okay, so this lifetime is not important. I've got to use it well. Don't waste my time in pleasure. Don't work for future lifetimes, right? Because that's impermanent as well. And then you study. Winnie Jones says, born as a god. Okay, I'll have to explain that in a minute. And then you study karma, cause, and effect. Positive actions lead to positive results. Negative actions lead to negative results. And then also if I apply myself to liberation, that can happen. And then you know how to conduct yourself, right? And then finally you meditate on the sufferings of samsara, and you realize how futile samsara is, and then you work to gain liberation or the state of a Buddha. So these are the common preliminaries for all traditions, common to all traditions. And then what you do specifically for the preliminary practice, like pre-lamrim, the person says, then they're often very similar, some differences. They usually start with a refuge in bodhicitta, which it looks like, what does it look like? Well, it looks like doing 100,000 prostrations. And that's almost all of them will do that. And some people say you have to do 250,000 prostrations. And the mindset is a mind of renunciation and a mind of loving kindness and compassion. And then in general, you will almost always do a Vajrasattva practice, which is to purify your negativity. That's to prepare the ground, to get rid of all the negative obscurations, clear them away before you practice. And then you will typically do a mandala offering, which is basically a way of accumulating merit and wisdom. It's gathering accumulations. And then you will do, at the end, you will generally do what is called Guru Yoga. Guru Yoga is a way of giving faith and devotion to your teacher. But included within that, there might be these Kusali practices, which are Chit practice, which is like offering your body to spirits. And there's different things. Sometimes there's 6 uncommon, sometimes there's 4. But they're all more or less the same thing. And they generally involve 100,000 repetitions of a particular practice. So you'll do 400,000 or 600,000. But again, some people do 1 million, 250,000 of each. So born as a god, yeah. So Winnie just explained in the Buddhist kind of cosmology, there are different types of life forms. Generally, there are 6, but there are infinite life forms because there are infinite different universes, different iterations of the dimensions, for example. Not all universes have the same dimensions. So you can be born in any one of those. And what are called humans are kind of in the center. And then there's these beings who are born in really horrible places where they just suffer continually. And that's like what we conceptualize as hell realms. There are kind of disembodied spirits who wander around aimlessly in a kind of dark spirit realm. There's animals, there's humans, and then there's also gods. But these aren't like creator gods. They're people with huge amounts of luxury. So you could imagine them to be like super advanced civilizations where they have no disease or suffering. And they're just plugged into joy all the time. Like they basically are, they have instant pleasure for whatever they do. And everything they want is fulfilled because they're so advanced. And that's actually a disadvantage being born as a god. Because you don't develop renunciation. You're kind of too distracted by your wealth and luxury. So anyway, that's a kind of very brief understanding of explanation of the life forms in the Buddhist cosmology. But ultimately, they're infinite different ones. We can't imagine all the different types of life forms that there are, as taught by Buddha Dharma. Considering the phenomenon of so-called teachers that use the Dharma to accumulate wealth or power, especially in the West, how can Buddhism prevent its own appropriation by other ideologies, or is that a misguided notion? Well, there's hypocrisy and pretense is seen to be a really bad thing in the Buddha Dharma, but it's not just in modern times. If you look at the ancient texts, then there are very few authentic practitioners. For example, Milarepa is one of the most respected yogis in our Tibetan tradition. Pretty well all Tibetan Buddhists venerate Milarepa. And at his time, there were lots of famous lamas like this who just made wealth, who got wealthy and got lots of girlfriends and lots of power and influence. And it was one of these who actually tried to kill Milarepa, poison Milarepa. So if you look through the history, there was always the authentic ones were very few. And there were a lot of charlatans. And the problem is really, especially these days, is that because of these people who are kind of, not all of them are charlatans, some of them just misbehave, and they're giving Buddhism a bad name, and it's causing the destruction of Buddhism. In terms of appropriation by other ideologies, well, that's happened, right? Every single new age spirituality that's come about basically is appropriating lots of Buddhist ideas, even when they don't, or they're not compatible with their own position. So you hear them, they'll talk about karma, they'll talk about no self and emptiness. At the same time, they'll talk about God being responsible for everything, and they'll talk about, the sort of like the soul being permanent. So you see this all the time. If you look on YouTube, half the people who are talking about spirituality, they're borrowing about 50% of what they say from Buddhism, even though it's totally incompatible with their own tradition. And so it's becoming diluted and watered down. But the Buddha predicted all of this. The Buddha said this is what's going to happen, and this is when it's going to happen. The time frame is pretty good. We're basically at the end of the time where Buddhism will exist in the world. At the very end, there'll just be this sort of semblance of Buddhism. You know, there'll be, at one point they say there's just like the scriptures are left, or there's just the outer aspects, just like people will wear the robes, but they won't understand what they're talking about. And in the end, there'll be monkeys on thrones teaching the Dharma. So that's the stage we've come to, folks. I'm the monkey on the throne, you know, the fake teaching the Dharma. This is where we are. There's nothing we can do about it. It's like a pebble dropped in the ocean, right, or in the lake. The pebble drops in, and then these waves are created and they spread out, but eventually those waves disappear. So the pebble is the Buddha. The Buddha comes, influences people. That goes from generation to generation. One person gains realization, they teach the realization to the next, and then it fades out. And we're at that stage. And then in between, there's what we call these dark periods. Where these dark periods are when the Dharma disappears from the world, and then we enter into this kind of like barbaric period that lasts for quite a long time. And then eventually what happens is we become fed up with suffering so much, and we start applying ourselves to virtue. So we're going to go through this period where there's lots of fighting and war, and then eventually people will react to that and apply themselves to virtue. And when they accumulate enough virtue, or they're ripe, they're ready for ripening, then the next Buddha Maitreya will appear. That's what's taught. During the last live stream, Lama Choga, so this is going to be a long time ago, so it's not the last live stream. During the last live stream, Lama Choga said that all emotions are bliss. Is this true? As well as that emotions are temporary and not real? Well, of course emotions are temporary and not real. If they're permanent, let's say I got angry this morning, and if it was permanent, it would never stop, right? I'd just be angry forever. We know all experience, right? All this experience we have, everything we perceive is a continual flux of changing of experience. Nothing lasts. Everything is impermanent. If you study in the Theravada tradition, then you will be looking at what are called the three signs of existence, and one of these is impermanence of phenomena. So whatever phenomena you witness, then that is impermanent. If you can find a permanent phenomena, please write me a comment and let me know, because I've never seen one. So this teaching that all emotions are bliss comes from the Dzogchen. So in general, in the Sutra Paramitrayana, we hear this expression of appearance emptiness. This is associated with the two truths and the Vajrayana kind of the Zen presentation, and it talks that all appearance are inseparable from emptiness. So everything is empty in nature. But in the Mahamudra, they talk about clarity emptiness, and in the Dzogchen tradition, they talk about bliss emptiness. And so for us, through association, we see emotions to be good or bad, right? This is a difficult point. In the Vajrayana, it says the kleshas, the negative emotions, are wisdom, or the negative emotions are bliss. And it says there is no good or bad. And then we think, well, that's kind of contradictory. Either people think, great, I can do whatever I want, which is what happens for impermanence is permanent. Yeah, how can something changing be permanent? Right? The process of impermanence is that something is not staying the same. So how can that be permanent? It can be a truth. It can be a truth, but our truth's permanent. Sorry for getting distracted. But it's a good point, Benjamin. So there's what are called the three non-composite phenomena. There are three non-composite phenomena that are said to be permanent in Buddhism. Right? So there is something that's permanent. The question is, have you ever experienced these? One is non-compounded space. Now, this is a difficult point because we're not sure now that space is all-pervasive. Certainly from the special interpretation of the theory of relativity, then what we think is that space expands with matter, so they're dependent upon each other. That means it wouldn't be a permanent or non-composite phenomenon. But anyway, that aside, still many scientists wonder whether space is non-compounded. So in Buddhism we say this non-compounded space. Like we think the universe is there and there's all the space it can expand into, the empty part, that's permanent. And then cessation is said to be permanent. So this is what's called the discriminative cessation. So that is the realization of an arahat or, somebody who's liberated from samsara. That's seen to be a permanent and non-cause phenomena. And then the third one is called this the cessation that arises from not discriminating. So it doesn't arise from discriminating the four truths, etc. It is, and to explain what that is kind of difficult. So you can see I don't have a horn on my head, right? Do I? Maybe I do. I don't have a horn on my head. Why don't I have a horn on my head? I don't have a horn on my head because I don't have the causes and conditions for a horn to grow. So now there's this genetic experiments where they can make like teeth grow in chickens and stuff like that. So maybe I could grow a horn on my head, but there's no horn on my head because the causes and conditions aren't met. And so this non-existent thing is a permanent phenomena. Something that it doesn't exist, like the non-existence of hairs on a turtle, for example, is called a permanent phenomena. But this in the higher levels of Buddha Dharma is explained to be a conceptual imputation. It's not a thing, right? So basically these aren't things we're going to find. Until you gain awakening, then you're not going to find it. And even the most intelligent and best scientists in the world can't decide what space is. And we have no means of defining what space is or investigating it. Right? We don't have experiments that we're able to do this. They're trying to develop these experiments. We don't have that yet. So that was about permanent things. We're looking at emotions being bliss. Okay, this is a difficult point. I've said this before because we have this conceptualization of things being a continuum. For example, the self being a continuum. And we see that continuum to be an existent thing. This is seeing that which does not possess a self to be a self. And what is a continuum? Well, what we experience is the present moment of awareness, right? All these people who are into spiritual jargon, they know about this. We've got this present moment of awareness. And so we've got these past moments of awareness, and we've got future moments of awareness. We've got this, hello Brazil, we've got this past me, present me, and future me. So we contrive these three things together, and we think of a continuum called a self. You can understand that, right? But this self doesn't exist in one time. Doesn't exist as a thing. Like if I look at a river, I say a river is a continuum, right? A chain of mountains is a continuum. I can see uphill, I can see the river, and downhill I can see the river. And the mountains I can see, there's Mount Everest over there, and there's Mount Kailash over there. It's a chain of mountains. I can see that continuum. But I can't see past me, present me, and future me. So what we do is we conceptualize we conceptualize this self as being this continuum. And it's also the same with emotions. Somebody has called me a light version of Keanu Reeves. It's very funny because I've had that all my life. I used to have very long hair as well. And people would always say they thought I was Keanu Reeves. But I think the only thing we have in common is he's Canadian as well. So we have this idea that emotion is basically our idea of an emotion. Like if I'm angry with somebody, it's a continuum of experience. That is negative because it's a compounded and a mistaken phenomena. It comes out of misidentification. But do we experience this continuum of motion? No, we don't. All we experience is the present moment. And that present moment, emotionally, in terms of feelings, energetically, whatever you want to call it, that experience is bliss. This is what that statement means. So if you've done a bit of meditation, what you'll find is you'll have this feeling like, I'm meditating, and then I have this blissful feeling arise. And then what we do is we try to think, oh, how did I create that? How can I make that continue, right? And then it immediately goes away. Why is that? Because this idea that I can create it is missing the point. That presence is itself bliss. That experience of presence, experience of clarity, whatever it is, the moment of mind, that is the only thing we have, is bliss. But suffering is this thinking the past, present, and future is somehow a thing. So I've experienced of bliss because what I do, I let go, I'm in meditation, I just rest, I let go of all my conceptual imputations. And then I notice, oh, this experience is blissful. And then I think, oh, how did I create that? What did I do to make that? And then we expand our mind into a concept, a conceptual construct of a continuum, and the bliss disappears. Because we've done the opposite of what we need to do. We just need to leave things alone. So this is the context in which bliss is, emotions are bliss, but bliss is also emptiness, right? This is the meaning of emptiness. All phenomena themselves have no defining characteristics, although they appear. It's only when we concoct this notion of existence in the three times that we suffer, or we have problems. So is this true? As well as the emotions are temporary and not real. Yes, they're temporary and not real. Does this mean you could still enjoy them as they happen? This is missing the point, right? The reason why we don't understand emptiness, the reason why we don't understand bliss as emotion, the reason why we don't understand wisdom as emotion is because we think that they happen. They're a thing that persists. We think they're a continuum. It means, could we still enjoy them as they happen? We don't. We think, oh, this, whatever it is, let's say these mushrooms I took, or pleasurable experience. We see this as like this process as being something real, right? So when that process ends, then we think, oh, that was nice. I wish I could have that again. So it causes us suffering. We don't enjoy it. All you need to do to enjoy this concept of bliss, of things being bliss. Hey, the guy from the ways here, hello. The things as being bliss is if we just let go in the present moment. But we're not able to do that, because then we cling to identity, we cling to an experience, and we destroy our own well-being. Does the problem lie in clinging to and identifying them? Yes, that's it. The problem is clinging to them, but not clinging to them. Like, I've got this coin, I can cling to that, right? There is nothing to cling to. Taking a continuum to be something real, there's nothing to cling to, but I can hold this coin, I can hold several coins. So we're trying to grasp at that which does not exist. So it's our clinging to something that doesn't exist, not clinging to them. And we're identifying something to be something it is not. We're identifying something that is not self to be self. We're identifying something that is not emotion to be emotion, etc., etc. And the goal isn't then to repress or ignore them. No, repression is the same mistake. Repression is like, oh, there's this imaginary kind of like, there's this rat, this vermin I need to get rid of. We imagine there's this thing I need to get rid of, and I can never find it, right? So I spend all my energy trying to repress or ignore something that doesn't exist. Okay, let's try to move on. Could you please explain the 10 bhumis, especially if there are any method or are they reliable signs of having reached a certain bhumi level? Yes, there are reliable signs. It's all very specifically laid out. There's these two different systems of teaching. One is called the vast, right? It's the vast and profound, basically. And so there's this vast way of teaching is generally in the structure of teaching the levels, paths and levels. And so where do you want to look? Well, you look at Entering the Middle Way, the commentary by Chantakirti. It explains the paths and levels, right? You look at texts like the highest continuum, commentaries on the highest continuum. Many of these ancient texts, then they lay out exactly what they are, and they say what happens specifically. And the reason why they say that is because people don't often know that they've reached a particular stage. It says often, for example, when they reach the first level, then they're not aware it happened. But then certain weird things will happen. Like they'll manifest two bodies at the same time. They go, wait a second, what happened there? And then they'll look it up in the book. Oh, I must have reached the first bhumi, right? So, but let's just look at this really generally, because it's a really huge topic. If you look at some of these texts like Vasubandhu and things like that, there's the Bodhisattva levels, for example, which talks about the 10 levels. There's huge texts, and the commentaries on them are volumes and volumes and volumes. So it's a really big topic. So in general, what are we talking about? So the first bhumi is what we call the first bodhisattva bhumi. That's when you become a noble being. And arhats achieve the first bhumi, although it's called something different. And the bodhisattvas both reach what's called the path of insight, right? They both reach it. What they achieve is different. But what is consistent for everyone is when you hit the first bhumi, you are out of samsara. You have gone beyond suffering. That's the important part. This is what we call liberation. There's liberation, and there's awakening as a fully enlightened Buddha or a Tathagata. They're different. After the 10th bhumi, then you become a Buddha. The first bhumi, you are liberated. Maybe you could say you're enlightened. So let's say, just say liberated. You're out of samsara. And so you can see there's a long way to go from being a first level bodhisattva to being a 10th level bodhisattva. And then what else can we say about it? Well, we can say something about the beginning, middle, and end. So at the beginning, first bhumi, then you are out of samsara. If you're a bodhisattva, then you have a certain amount of qualities. For example, you can manifest in different, you can manifest in 100 different worlds simultaneously. So I suppose it's tapping into multiverses is what happens. You unlock your mind to the point where you're no longer bound by samsara, but you're limited. And as you go up in the bhumis, then you can manifest in more different locations. So it's kind of like that, the qualities they talk about. I can't go into detail, but it talks about all the it talks about all these different qualities, and it's like 100 manifestations, let's say. That's, I don't know if that's a fixed figure. But the important thing is at that point you are liberated. And both arhats and bodhisattvas are liberated at that point. But there's a difference. An arhat has a higher level of intelligence than a bodhisattva does on the first bhumi. And it's only once the bodhisattva reaches the 6th bhumi that he is equal to the intelligence of an arhat. And so they surpass the arhat on the 7th bhumi. So you could just think about it in stages, right? So at the first bhumi, then you're out of samsara. And if you're a bodhisattva, that's irreversible. That means you can't go back to samsara. You can intentionally be reborn in samsara. That's one of the qualities you gain, is this ability to be reborn in samsara, but you don't suffer. You kind of take on a tutelary role in samsara, and you choose, you can choose who you're going to be born as and what qualities you will have, and you do so for the benefit of others. The arhat doesn't return to samsara, but an arhat can be on the first bhumi and reverse. And the reason why is, as long as they still have this body, which is to them is still the source of suffering, then they can slip back into suffering of samsara. Once they die, however, then they're out of samsara. So that's important. The bodhisattva, even if they still have this body, they haven't died yet, but they were in the first bhumi, then they're out. They won't reverse. That's a difference. And then in the middle, what did I say? Well, they're almost the same, but the bodhisattva surpasses the intelligence of an arhat on the 7th bhumi. And then there's the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis. And the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis are called the pure levels because they've purified all of their obscurations. They've basically achieved non-duality, true non-duality. The first bhumi is what we would think was non-duality. Actually, what most people these days talk about as non-duality is just a concept. It's got nothing to do with realization. But on the first, on the first bhumi, you realize emptiness, where an arhat realizes no self. And that's kind of like non-duality, but it's only the 8th, 9th, 10th when you truly realize non-duality, and you've completely removed your obscurations. You're still not a Buddha, but it's pretty damn close. I mean, for us, it's just astronomical, right? Even for us, first level bodhisattva is like a Buddha. But the 8th, 9th, and 10th are the pure levels, and on the 11th, then you're a Buddha. Yeah, are there any methods or reliable signs of reaching certain Buddha level? Yes. Read those texts I talked about, the Bodhisattva levels, or the Bodhisattva grounds. That's a good text to look at. Look at Chantakirti's Entering the Middle Way. And there are many, many different texts, and they explain what you expect on each level. And also, don't hold your breath. Don't think that you're going to be on the first bhumi anytime soon. In fact, don't even think you're on the path of accumulation. It's really difficult. For us, path of accumulation is phenomenally difficult. The Dalai Lama, who many people say is a Buddha, in his own opinion, he's only on the 3rd level of the path of accumulation. So he's not even a noble being. And he doesn't say that out of humility. He says that because he's very learned. He knows what all the qualities are. This text I'm talking about, how do you know what level you're on? Well, he studied all of those, and in his own meditation, he's seen the signs of being on the 3rd level, the upper level of the path of accumulation. And one of those signs is you start to have real experiences of emptiness. So he's had those, and he's like, oh, I must be on this level. Pretty soon I could be on the 1st level of the path of juncture. That's a really kind of intelligent way of doing it. For us, we're not even what you call the lesser type of Dharma practitioner. There's 3 types of Dharma practitioners, capable Dharma practitioners: lesser, middling, and higher. The lesser one gives up on this life in return for gaining higher rebirths in future lifetimes. So it's not even what we call a high motivation. That type of individual is very hard to find, very hard to even be that, and they're not even on the path of accumulation necessarily. Given the unavoidable impact we have on other living beings, including microorganisms and ecosystems, is it truly possible to lead a life that aligns with non-violence? No. As long as you are in samsara, you're complicit in the suffering of others. So don't kid yourself on that you can completely abandon harm. He says non-violence, ahimsa, non-harm. Even if we are vegetarians or vegans, right, then everything we eat is associated with the harm of others. The characteristic of samsara is that as long as you're born here, then you will engage in negativity and you will be complicit in the suffering of others. But we can do our best to reduce that and slowly, eventually find our way to getting on the path. That means joining the path of accumulation and then eventually gaining insight or liberation. And how do we determine which sacrifices are ethically justifiable in our pursuit of progress and comfort? Well, the pursuit of progress and comfort isn't a valid motivation in any estimation of the Buddha Dharma. I just said there's 3 types of valid Dharma practitioners. The first one, the lesser one, gives up any hope of progress or comfort for this life, and does so not for liberation, but to be reborn in higher realms. And that could be a good motivation. I want to be reborn in a higher, sort of with better resources in the future lifetime, so I can practice the Dharma and become a Buddha. That's fine. But this type of individual has no concern for progress or comfort. They give up all concerns for this life. They're willing to starve to death in order to achieve their goals. And so when you're talking about how can we judge what is a valid sacrifice, ethically and justifiable in pursuit of progress and comfort, well, that's just worldly. It's got nothing to do with the Dharma. Like replacing forests with apartment buildings and supermarkets. These are all kind of worldly concepts. I mean, somebody in our preliminaries class asked a similar question and said, well, if I go to the supermarket, then I'm involved in all kinds of negativity just to get some food. Like if I get some soybeans for some vegetarian food, then there's all this negativity. But if I go out in the forest and I kill a moose and I share it, I can feed an entire village. Well, the Tibetans talk about these points all the time. But these are worldly questions. These aren't spiritual questions. For example, okay, so we're going to feed the whole world with moose. Okay, they take a city like Beijing, 30 million people. How many moose do you need to kill? This thing ain't going to work, right? These are worldly questions. You just can't do it. That's why we farm soybeans. That's why we farm wheat, etc. Because we can't. If we go out, even 100 people go out into the forest around here and start killing moose to feed everyone, the moose are going to be extinct, in a decade. So forget it. It's just these are just kind of worldly conceptual games we get into. What you have to do is apply yourself to virtuous mindset. And it's very clear cut in the Buddha Dharma. We're going to have problems. We're going to be in difficult ethical situations. There are going to be paradoxes. But the valid motivation is, I will become a Buddha in order to liberate all sentient beings from the cycle of samsara. Because as long as we're in samsara, we're going to have these issues. We're going to be complicit in the suffering of others. We're going to make mistakes. What we can do is going to be wrong. There is no perfection till Buddhahood. So I have to work towards that. And it ain't a difficult path. It takes 3 countless eons. And so I'd better start now. And don't be a perfectionist, just do your best. I think that's a good point for us to leave today's discussion. I hope I've given you things to think about. At the end, as usual, then please think if there's been any kind of virtue from our interaction, from our engagement today, then let's not use that for ourselves, but dedicate that to the benefit of all sentient beings, especially those who are suffering so greatly, all those people on the front line in Ukraine and in Gaza, who basically, they haven't got time for anything but survival, and they just suffer from day to day. And so turning our attention towards the benefit of others, let's dedicate the merit, and thank you for sharing your questions and your attention and engaging in the conversation. Please join our Discord. You can see the link in the chat window. Mary's kindly posted that for us. join the Discord, and then we can continue the conversation on how we can ethically and positively benefit others in a kind of meaningful and long-reaching way, with long-reaching goals. And in the Buddha Dharma, that means that we aim towards liberation and Buddhahood. So until next time, and see you later.